You're listening to Books and Ideas Audio, a presentation of the Vancouver Writers Fest. The Vancouver Writers Fest connects people to exceptional books, ideas, and dialogue through year-round programming that ignites a passion for words and the world around us. We carry out our work on the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. This month on the podcast, we're thrilled to feature the Booker Prize-winning author Arundhati Roy. The author of The God of Small Things and The Ministry of Utmost Happiness joined us last year at a sold-out event with her debut memoir, Mother Mary Comes to Me. Tracing her complex relationship with her mother, this deeply moving memoir was one of the best-reviewed books of the year. Roy speaks with award-winning author and activist Naomi Klein, who was also her longtime friend. This event was recorded live on September 17, 2025, and presented in partnership with UBC Centre for Climate Justice and Indian Summer Festival, and with the support of Simon & Schuster Canada. If you'd like to hear more events like this one, check out our upcoming programming at writersfest.bc.ca. The Vancouver Writers Fest would like to thank our public sector funders, without whom we couldn't do our work. They are the Government of Canada, the Canada Council for the Arts, the Government of BC, the BC Arts Council, the City of Vancouver, and CMHC Granville Island.
Thank you. In the interest of full disclosure, I must tell you that my friend Anthony Yarnov, my comrade and publisher of Haymarket Books, is traveling with me. His girlfriend is called Naomi, and whenever we talk of Naomi, I say, yours or mine? This one is mine. So, really, it's been amazing. The last few days I spent at her home in Half Moon Bay. And we had a little pact, sort of unspoken pact, that we were going to enjoy the beauty of this place, this land that has been tended by its people for so many centuries. So we saw purple starfish, we went paddling on the ocean, we saw shoals of herring flash by, and we saw sea lions feasting on the salmon. But on the way back, we switched on the news. And it was as if a cloudburst of blood from Gaza had fallen and drenched all of us, the sea lions, the starfish, all of us together. The blood of children who've been shot in the head, the blood of a population, 83% of whom were civilians who have been targeted and killed, the blood of journalists, hospitals, doctors. Yesterday, I think the UN called it a genocide. We've been saying that for a very long time. And the thing about this genocide is that it could end in an afternoon. It would take one phone call, but it will not end. And we are forced to watch it and forced to live through it, forced to watch this open wound of the world bleed. It is beyond politics now. It is psychotic, what is going on. And through this psychosis, through this madness, we must do our work. It is through this madness and through the sorrow of this, and of course my own personal grief, that I wrote Mother Mary Comes to Me. I wrote it without looking away from Gaza. So as you know, Mother Mary Comes to Me is from a Beatles song, and it's dedicated to my brother, LKC. Together we made it to the shore. And then to my mother, Mary Roy, who never said, let it be. So I'm just going to read the first chapter. It's called Gangster. She chose September, that most excellent month, to make her move. The monsoon had receded, leaving Kerala gleaming like an emerald strip between the mountains and the sea. As the plane banked to land and the earth rose to greet us, I couldn't believe that topography could cause such palpable physical pain. I had never known that beloved landscape, never imagined it, never evoked it without her being part of it. I couldn't think of those hills and trees, the green rivers, the shrinking, cemented over rice fields with giant billboards rising out of them, advertising awful wedding saris and even worse jewelry, without thinking of her. She was woven through it all, taller in my mind than any billboard, more perilous than any river in spate, more relentless than the rain, more present than the sea itself. How could this have happened? How? She checked out with no advance notice, typically unpredictable. The church didn't want her. She didn't want the church. There was savage history there, nothing to do with God. So, given her standing in our town and given our town, we had to fashion a fitting funeral for her. The local papers reported her passing on their front pages. Most national papers mentioned it too. The internet lit up with an outpouring of love from generations of students who had studied in the school she founded, whose lives she had transformed, and from others who knew of the legendary legal battle she had waged and won for equal inheritance rights for Christian women in Kerala. The deluge of obituaries made it even more crucial that we do the right thing and send her off the way she deserved. But what was that right thing? Fortunately, on the day she died, the school was closed and the children had gone home. The campus was ours. It was a huge relief. Perhaps she had planned that too. Conversations about her death and its consequences for us, especially me, had begun when I was 3 years old. She was 30 then, debilitated by asthma, dead broke. Her only asset was a bachelor's degree in education, and she had just walked out on her husband, my father, I should say, although somehow that comes out sounding strange. She was almost 89 when she died, so we had 60 years to discuss her imminent death and her latest will and testament, which, given her preoccupation with inheritance and wills, she rewrote almost every other week. The number of false alarms, close shaves, and great escapes that she racked up would have given Houdini pause for thought. They lulled us into a sort of catastrophe complacency. I truly believed she would outlive me. When she didn't, I was wrecked, heart smashed. I am puzzled and more than a little ashamed by the intensity of my response. My brother put his finger sharply on that nerve. I don't understand your reaction. She treated nobody as badly as she treated you. He could be right, although according to me, it was he who held that trophy. I can understand him feeling that I was humiliating myself by not acknowledging what had happened to us as children. But I had put that behind me a long time ago. I have seen and written about such sorrow, such systemic deprivation, such unmitigated wickedness, such diverse iterations of hell, that I can only count myself among the most fortunate. I have thought of my own life as a footnote to the things that really matter, never tragic, often hilarious. Or perhaps this is the lie I tell myself. Maybe I pitched my tent where the wind blows strongest, hoping it would blow my heart clean out of my body. Perhaps what I'm about to write is a betrayal of my younger self by the person I have become. If so, it's no small sin, but I'm in no position to be the judge of that. I left home, stopped going home, or what passed as home, after I turned 18. I had just entered my third year at the School of Architecture in Delhi. In those days, we finished high school at 16. That's how old I was in the summer of 1976 when I first arrived at Nizamuddin Station alone, without even a working knowledge of Hindi, to take the entrance exam for the School of Architecture. I was terrified and had a knife in my bag. Delhi was 3 days and 2 nights away by train from Cochin, which is a 3-hour drive from our town Kottayam, which in turn is a few miles away from our village Aimanam, where I spent my early childhood. In other words, for me, Delhi was a different country altogether. Different language, different food, different climate, different everything. The scale of the city was beyond my comprehension. I came from a place where everybody knew where everyone lived. Pathetically, I asked an auto rickshaw driver if he could take me to the home of my mother's oldest sister, Mrs. Joseph. I assumed he knew where she lived. He took a deep drag of his beedi and turned away looking bored. 2 years later, I was the one smoking beedies and cultivating that peerless look of bored disdain. In time, I traded in my knife for a good supply of hashish and some big city attitude. I had emigrated. I left my mother not because I didn't love her, but to be able to continue to love her. Staying would have made that impossible. Once I left, I didn't see or speak to her for years. She never looked for me. She never asked why I left. There was no need for that. We both knew. We settled on a lie, a good one. I crafted it. She loved me enough to let me go. That's what I said at the front of my first novel, The God of Small Things, which I dedicated to her. She quoted it often as though it were God's truth. My brother jokes that it's the only piece of real fiction in the book. To the end of her days, she never asked me how I managed during those 7 years when I was a runaway. She never asked me where I lived or how I completed my course of study and took my degree. I never told her I managed well enough. After our brittle, tentative reunion, I returned to her, visiting her regularly over the years as an independent adult, a qualified architect, a production designer, a writer, but most of all, as a woman watching another with love and admiration and a fair amount of disquiet, not just for her great qualities, but the opposite too. In that conservative, stifling little South Indian town, where in those days women were allowed only the option of cloying virtue or its affectation, my mother conducted herself with the edginess of a gangster. I watched her unleash all of herself, her genius, her eccentricity, her radical kindness, her militant courage, her ruthlessness, her generosity, her cruelty, her bullying, her head for business, and her wild, unpredictable temper, with complete abandon on our tiny, insular Syrian Christian society, which, because of its education and relative wealth, was sequestered from the swirling violence and debilitating poverty in the rest of the country. I watched her make space for the whole of herself, for all herselves in that little world. It was nothing short of a miracle, a terror and a wonder to behold. Once I learned to protect myself, somewhat, from its soul-crushing meanness, I even grew fascinated by her wrath against motherhood itself. Sometimes the barefaced nakedness of it made me laugh. Not the laughing out loud kind of laughter, but the kind that comes upon you when you're alone, when you surgically excise an incident from its circumstances and look at it dispassionately, shorn of context, as though she was someone else's mother, and as though it were not I, but someone else who was the object of her wrath. As a child, I loved her irrationally, helplessly, fearfully, completely, as children do. As an adult, I try to love her coolly, rationally, and from a safe distance. I often failed, sometimes miserably. I wrote versions of her in my books, but I never wrote her. She liked those versions, though, and embraced the character of Ammu in The God of Small Things, whom she would refer to as I and me. She wanted to be Ammu because she knew very well that she wasn't. When a mischievous journalist asked her whether she had indeed had a tragic love affair, as Ammu did in the book, she looked him in the eye and said, "Why? Aren't I sexy enough?" She was in her 60s by then, a diva of her own making. She could say what she liked. When the book came out, she was worried about what secrets it might reveal. To be safe, she checked herself into hospital. There she read it hurriedly and was greatly relieved that it wasn't any kind of expose. At first, she said she couldn't understand what the fuss was all about. Then she studied it closely. After her third or fourth reading, she was home by then, she summoned me to her bedside. It was a bright afternoon, and the light that filtered through her curtains was bordello red. Her eyes were shut. She said that she thought it was a good book, well written, but she wanted to know about a particular passage, one in which Amu's 7-year-old twins, Esteban and Rahel, remembered their parents fighting, how they grew huge like giants and pushed the children from one to the other, saying, "You take them, I don't want them." "Who told you about this? You were too young to remember." "It's fiction." "No, it's not." And she turned to the wall. I have never felt the weight or the sorrow of this memory. I really believed it was fiction. I learned that day that most of us are a living, breathing soup of memory and imagination, and that we may not be the best arbiters of which is which. So read this book as you would a novel. It makes no larger claim. But then there can be no larger claim. Fiction is that strange, smoky thing that writers don't entirely own, even if they think they do. Where does it come from? Our past, our present, our reading, our imagination? Yes. But perhaps from premonitions of our future too? How else can it be that, like the characters in my second novel, The Ministry of Utmost Happiness, I too am now the caretaker of a sort of grave in the grounds of a sort of guest house? It's outlandish, it keeps me awake at night. But then I ask myself, why should we know everything? In my effort to fathom my mother, to see things from her perspective, to accommodate her, to understand what hurt her, what made her do the things she did, and to predict what she may or may not do next, I turned into a maze, a labyrinth of pathways that zigzag underground and surface in strange places, hoping to gain a vantage point for a perspective other than my own. Seeing her through lenses that were not entirely colored by my own experience of her made me value her for the woman she was. It made me a writer, a novelist, because that's what novelists are, labyrinths. And now this labyrinth must make sense of its labyrinthine self without her. To bridge the chasm between the legacy of love she left for those whose life she touched and the thorns she set down for me like little floaters in my bloodstream, fish hooks that still catch on soft tissue as my blood makes its way to and from my heart, is why I write this book. It is as hard to write as it is not to. Perhaps even more than a daughter mourning the passing of her mother, I mourn her as a writer who has lost her most enthralling subject. In these pages, my mother, my gangster, shall live. She was my shelter and my storm. Thank you.
was so beautiful.
Thank you, my Naomi.
Well, I want to thank the Vancouver Writers Festival for bringing you to us. We could have filled this room 3 or 4 times over. There are many broken hearts out there in Vancouver. I hope you will come back soon to mend them.
If I get a visa.
If you get a visa, it's been 6 years, and there was a lot of pent up need. So thank you for being here. And you know, I was so struck that you referred to your mother right off the bat as a gangster, because I don't know if you remember this, but the first time we met 25 years ago, one of the very first things you said to me is, you said something like, people think I'm this precious thing, but I'm a hooligan, So with your permission, I'm going to read the text message, a little part of the text message that I sent to you a few months ago. Okay. I finished your magnificent book last night, My Dazzling Hooligan Sister, and could not sleep. Among many other emotions, it made me feel so much closer to you, filled in so many silences, alluded to but never fully explained. It is an extraordinary feat of love, Arundhati, to see her so clearly, be hurt so deeply, and still love so profoundly. I've never witnessed it before, and I'm so grateful that you have taken control over your life story as the industrial-scale liars close in everywhere. I cracked up many times, shuddered, and cried. Then I quoted some of my favorite lines and parts, which we're going to get to. There's going to be more Arundhati reading. You've invented a new form that is so completely and rebelliously you. So, the first thing I mean, you just read so beautifully about so many aspects of your mother as your subject, somebody who turned you into a writer. My friend Keo McClear, who's also a wonderful writer, read your book, and she said she was your primal puzzle. And so what was so puzzling that you have spent a lifetime trying to understand and unlock, and what are the contradictions at the heart of her story?
Well, she, there was a public person, and that was an amazing person because, as I said here, she actually had a very, very cruel father, and as she told me very often that I married the first person who asked me to marry him, and he happened to be from a, not from Kerala, but from West Bengal, and working in the tea estates in Assam, like as far away from Kerala as you could get. And then she realized that the person she had married was addicted to alcohol, and she had 2 children, and she decided to leave. And she had nothing. She had no money. She had a degree in education. And she came back down south to Tamil Nadu, which is a state neighboring Kerala. We actually broke into her very cruel father, who was an imperial entomologist, who was very serious about the imperial part of his job. But he had died by then, and I think we broke into this little cottage, and we lived among these huge trunks full of his 3-piece suits and cufflinks and so on. And she was very ill. She was a severe asthmatic. She was all the time in bed. My brother and I was less than 3, and he was about 4.5, and we used to just stand there and watch her and think she's going to die. And then my grandmother and my mother's older brother came from Kerala to this little town, Uti, and basically said, get out of the house, because you're a woman, this is not your house, you have no rights to inherit anything. And we had to sort of run to a lawyer who told us that law doesn't apply in Tamil Nadu and so on. And so we managed to hold on, and stay in that place for a while. But that's when she learned about this Travancore Christian Succession Act, which basically gives women nothing. And she held on to this mortification, and she was like, I am going to fix this. But then she got so ill, so terribly ill, that we had to leave and go to Kerala where the weather was warmer. She had to eat her pride and go back and live with my grandmother and my uncle and all of this. But then she started a little school. It started in the rented premises of what was known as the Kottayam Rotary Club. There were 7 students, my brother and I among them. Every day we had to go in with brooms and clean up all the cigarette stubs and wash all the men's, used glasses, because Indian men never clean up after themselves. And then we would put out our little tables, and it became what I thought of as a sliding, folding school, because we had to slide away when the club gathered to meet. But then that school became very, very successful. It still runs and is a beautiful place. Of course, it has its own campus now. So between the running of the school and her challenging, when she could, this inheritance law, which was then struck down and gave Christian women in Kerala equal inheritance, she became an iconic figure. But behind that was this rage. She came back to a community as a divorced woman with 2 children. She was humiliated. We were humiliated. We were constantly told that she would tell us, the humiliation she would pass on to us, that we were called in Malayalam, address illatha pillare, which means, those children without an address, because nobody knew, like, who our father was and all this. And she would take out the anger against the men in her life, her husband, her brother, her father, onto my little brother, And she would humiliate him and call him a male chauvinist pig when he was, 4 or 5 years old. It wasn't actually funny, And then I've watched her beating him because she wasn't happy with with his report cards from the other school we were sent to. And I would watch through the keyhole, and then in the morning, he would come back to bed, we would both be awake, and in the morning she would wake me up and say, "Oh, you have a brilliant report." And I felt so ashamed of myself that I say in the book that from then to now, every time I am applauded, I feel that someone quiet is being beaten in the other room. And it is true, that was personal, but now it's political, as we know, and what's happening in the world. So and with me, there was this constant rage, and but I could see it like a chemical experiment almost, that the way she was humiliated and the anger she passed on to me. So it was almost like I became her mother. I became the person who had to understand that it wasn't whatever it was. And then because we were students in the school, and the school was the home, and we would have to call her Mrs. Roy because she didn't want the other children to feel we were special. So there was it was this light this light that she shone on the students of her school, and she just created this remarkable place. She infused such strength and power into the girl students. And then there was this darkness for my brother and myself. And that was what one had to negotiate the whole time, And to me, there was redemption in the fact that her battles for women were also for me, although not for her daughter, but for a woman. Whereas for my brother, it was pretty unredeeming.
That balance exists throughout the book. It weaves these different elements. It's so carefully calibrated. It isn't it's never one thing, and there are these moments where the cruelty is extraordinary, and then there's the next minute you have us cracking up, and there is the writing of the book where you're in control. You're in control of balancing all of that, and you do it like nobody else. And then there's the being out in the world talking about the book, where you're subject to other people's ideas of what a memoir is. And some of them want it to be one thing, a trauma memoir, tell me how she hurt you, right? And I've observed you being very resistant to these labels, like even a word like trauma. So why is it that you push back on that?
Well, to me, actually, a lot of people ask me, was this cathartic? And I say, come on, how can it be cathartic? I was dealing with it from the time I was 3 years old. So I sorted it out in how to live my life. But for me, it really was a challenge as a writer. Can I write about her without neatly packaging her? Can I write about the fact that even I could never make up my mind because we were just constantly being turned over, And so I said, sometimes I say she was like a airport with no landing strips. You just had to keep your plane in the air all the time. So I wanted to sort of share her with a reader with that same degree of confoundment that I went through all my life,
Right. That
And-
you can't
and-
really
and-
label it.
Yeah, and so I feel and sense, that in India or in our culture, there is this mother worship which comes out of worshipping mothers who produce sons and worship their sons. And then they are worshipped provided they behave themselves and, are goddess-like in their sacrifice or whatever. And then in this part of the world, increasingly, there's this sort of therapy-driven demonization of the mother where there's, like, people never seem to grow up and they just keep blaming their parents for everything, even when they're like grandparents themselves. And I felt like, I was reading a few of the biographies of Sylvia Plath, and I sort of got a feeling that as the feminist movement was gaining strength, the way of undermining it through the back door was to have this demon mother, And so for me, I didn't want to flatten my life with someone else's language. I wanted my life, especially because I'm a writer. Yeah. Thank you very much for your language, but you can keep it. Yeah. I can describe my own story and myself without these labels that flatten things or without external language that I have to wear as a borrowed garment. So for me, it was important to search for a language to describe this person who I really felt I needed to share with the world because she's such an amazing person in some ways, and I am grown up properly,
No, I loved getting to know her. And there is a short passage on page 46 where you extend from the feeling of not wanting to label your own childhood experiences to really a way of approaching the world. It's the unconquered moon.
So the thing is that, in the writing of this book, I was also very, very conscious of the fact that, though we shared so many experiences, what my brother went through was, and the pain of his pain and mine are different, and everyone's is different, so one has to allow that space for that. So I didn't ever want to sort of make it for me, like what I feel has to be what you feel, my opinion of her has to be your opinion of her, and so on. And so there's a lot of space for him, and he and I are very, very close now. So there was, when we were kids, we never spoke of her as anything but she, like we were saying, like she or Mrs. Roy. And she often didn't like us to be together, she kept us apart. So when she died, he was just like very cheerful, and I came undone. And if I could understand myself better, I'd probably understand a lot more about the world and certainly about my country, in which so many people seem to revere their persecutors and appear grateful to be subjugated and told what to do, what to wear, what to eat, and how to think. There is something naughty here, something puzzling about the human condition in all of this. But maybe it's best to leave some things ununderstood, mysterious. I'm all for the unclimbed mountain, the unconquered moon. I'm weary of endless theories and explanations. I think I've begun to prefer descriptions. Anyway, all this to say that while Mrs. Roy lay in her glass-topped coffin, I was in ruins, but my brother was jovial and warmly welcomed all those who came to pay their respects to her. People looked at him oddly, but he didn't care. I like that about him. He never pretends that what happened to us didn't happen. It was almost as though for her to shine her light on her students and give them all she had, he and I, had to absorb her darkness. Today, though, I am grateful for that gift of darkness. I learned to keep it close, to map it, to sift through its shades, to stare at it until it gave up its secrets. It turned out to be a route to freedom, too.
Now, the book is about your mother, but it's about your life. And it's also about your father, Mickey Roy, who has gotten a little bit less attention and is an incredible character and presence in the book. I found those parts about your father very moving. You said, in the reading to start, that it feels weird to even call him that because you didn't meet him until you were 25. You didn't have a memory of him. It feels like you made yourself quite vulnerable in writing about him because, Mary Roy, for all of her flaws, is this grand figure, and Mickey Roy is, by all sort of classic definitions, something else. And his life was marked by addiction, by homelessness. I would love for you to read again. I'm sorry, just listening to Arundhati. Are you with me? Like, what would we rather hear? Can you describe that meeting? It's wild.
Well, actually, it was, I had, been away from home for about 7 years already. And by chance, as fate would have it, I reconnected with my mother. This was, I think, in 85 or so. And she had come to Delhi because of this case that was now in the Supreme Court. And we had this very tentative reunion. And a few months after that, I got, my brother had not seen me for 7 years, and he saw a photograph of me in an old magazine. And the reason there was that photograph was because that's a whole other story about how that came to be, but I had acted in a movie, a small movie. And he saw this photograph, he found out who the producer was, who the director was, and he called the director, who later, of course, became my husband, and he said, I'm Arundhati's brother, and I'm in Delhi, and this is my phone number. I didn't have a phone, of course. I was living in a sort of storeroom somewhere, whatever. He said, I'm just leaving you this number, and can you ask her to call me? So I went to this sweet shop in Nizamuddin, and I called him, and it was the number of some very sleazy little hotel near the railway station. And he came on the line, and he said, "Hi, guess who's with me?" I haven't spoken to him for 7 years, and I said, "Baba." Like, I somehow just heard his voice, and I knew he had gone and found our father. And so then he said, come and see us. And I didn't know what to do. I went home to my room, and I stared at myself in the mirror all night for some stupid reason, thinking, what is this person going to look like? Because all I had ever seen was a photograph in which he was a pretty nice-looking man. So I just read a little bit. I don't know why I had this shallow anxiety about his looks. Maybe I had a premonition. What happened next is seared into my memory forever, although I might not have remembered it word for word, song for song, oil stain for oil stain, if I hadn't written it down. I wrote it on the typewriter Mrs. Roy gave me. Free writing, like Mrs. Roy taught me. Free writing without flinching. It's easier for me to write about politics or to write fiction than to write what I am about to write. There's no glory in this, nor, relatively speaking, any great tragedy. I wonder why I need to make this very private moment public. I think it's because there is a sweet, vanquished, impish tenderness about it that is precious. It's an ode to harmless roguery. Although calling it harmless may be an affront to those who try so hard to be responsible parents, perhaps I use that word because I survived it without great harm to myself. The hotel was exactly as I imagined it would be. Most of the guests were hippies in limp clothes on their way to and from Goa or Manali. Dope sellers were openly selling hashish and heroin in the corridor, which was infused with the sharp ammonia stench of urine. There were metal trays with old food and slanting towers of stained teacups outside most of the rooms. Room 17 was on the ground floor. It was built around a double bed. You could just about sidestep your way and slide along the wall to the bathroom. Nothing could have prepared me for what I encountered, my first sighting of my father. He was lying on his stomach with his knees bent, his feet waving at the ceiling. The ash from his cigarette had fallen onto the bed. When he saw me, he flicked his cigarette to the floor and rubbed the ash into the sheets. Then he stood up on the bed and held his hand out for me to shake. To get to him, I needed to climb onto the bed. I kicked off my shoes and climbed on, and we shook hands. My brother, beaming, climbed on too. We stood like that for a while, bouncing gently to keep our balance on the soft, spongy mattress. The Yalta Conference, Stalin, Roosevelt, and Churchill. Mickey Roy was as frail as a small bird, lame and hunched over. One eye was milky and opaque with an unattended to cataract. His right earlobe was missing. His skin looked scorched. His bone-thin legs came down together to his knees and then splayed apart and ended in two socked feet that sank into the dirty sheets. Through the space between his calves, I could see a triangle of hotel wall, peeling plaster, hair oil stains. I could tell that he was severely malnourished, like people in UN pamphlets. My brother and he looked at me and laughed. So when I first saw him, I was shocked, and some part of me was a little ashamed. I'm like, how can this be? And then the next minute, I asked myself, well, how much worse would you have felt if he was some smarmy, cigar-smoking CEO? This is okay, you know? And then, and then among the first things he did was he says, oh, hi, so do you still use bad language? I said, excuse me? He said, do you still use bad language? I said, well, you know, I was 2 years old when you last saw me, so what do you mean by that? So he says, you know, you're a very foul-mouthed little girl, and I accidentally brushed my cigarette against you, and you looked at me and said, chutia, which basically means asshole. So he's like, I hope you've improved. And anyway, this is a long chapter, but it was incredible.
The next chapter is called The Exquisite Art of Failure, and you get into your problems with these different categories. Like you said, your mother referred to him as the nothing man when you were growing up, and there are all these other characters in the book who might classically be written off as, a failure. But you don't really believe in that category or politically either.
My mother used to, I mean, we had very little information about my father, and one of the refrains was, oh, he was just a nothing man. And then if anything bad about us, she would be like, oh, you got that from your father. So I was like, for me and my brother, one half of us was a litter bin into which any kind of rubbish could be thrown, It was very, very difficult to think about it. But he was such a charming, I mean, at the end of this encounter, I was obviously completely broke, as was my brother. But by the time he left the hotel room, he had relieved us of what little money we had gone, And and then there was my mother's older brother, the one who actually rather cruelly had tried to turn us out of the house earlier, but later he became someone I truly came to love. He was a Rhodes Scholar who had returned to this little village. And then he started because he was a Marxist, he started a pickle factory. Then he organized the labor in the pickle factory against himself. and of course he was the person against whom my mother fought this case for equal inheritance. And he was literally turned out of the ancestral home, and I happened to be in Kerala when a journalist from Delhi came to Kerala, a documentary filmmaker, to make a film about the Syrian Christian inheritance law. So I went with him to the pickle factory where Isaac was, the CEO of the pickle factory, was now going to be interviewed about this case that he had just lost. So this journalist was like, he had come to this small town to patronize some small town hick, and he had no idea about the water he was swimming in. So he set up the shot, and he said, so, Mr. Isaac, as a leader of the Syrian Christian community, can you tell me your views on the Travancore Christian inheritance law? So Isaac looked at the camera for a long time, and he says, Mr. Talib, the Syrian Christians are a very diverse community. We have the Syrian Catholics, we have the Yakoba, we have the Marthoma, we have the Church of South India, we have the Pentecostals. All of us sort of hate each other. We have separate churches. We don't agree about anything, but if you question them closely, the one thing that they all agree about is that Mr. Isaac is not a leader of the community. This was, these were, and so for me, and he, when I was about 5 or 6 years old, he showed me a bauble of some kind, and he said, do you want this? And my greedy little heart said, yes, I want it. He said, I'll give it to you if you fail. And it really made me think, And now when I think of Mickey Roy and Isaac, I mean, they're so much more wonderful than these people who strut around and eat up the oxygen and think of themselves as great successes. And for me...
Try to conquer the moon.
Yeah, I want to conquer the moon like you-know-who.
You-know-who.
And then...
and the other you-know-who.
And, yeah, well, and to me, the meaning of success and failure has completely different connotations. I was speaking to someone the other day, and they were referring to me as a successful writer. I said, are you crazy? I mean, Naomi and I are the biggest failures you can possibly imagine. Every battle we fight, we lose, So that doesn't make us wrong. That doesn't make us wrong. But the fact is that people believe that you just take a position for the sake of it. No, we write because we really believe in what we're saying, and we really are broken people, and it doesn't help to get... Of course we can laugh, because, you don't sing happy songs happily and sad songs sadly, and being defeated does not mean... In fact, it probably means you laugh a lot more, But yeah, success and failure are all very complicated in my head.
So one of the great pleasures of this book is getting to know the artist that you are and were before most of us got to know you, which was with God of Small Things. We learn about your time as an architect, as an actor, as you mentioned, a screenwriter. We don't have time to get into all of those chapters, but there is this point when you decide that you're going to write your own novel and you're not going to be writing somebody else's script. And there's this very vivid description of hunting language, of really, it's quite predatory. And I was hoping that you could just say more about what that means and how and what it was like. You know, you're alone in the room, you've got your dogs, and you're trying to find language.
Well, I was, when I studied architecture and then I, gave it up because I wasn't going to build houses for rich people and I was selling cake on the beach. And then I met Pradeep, who was making a film and asked me to act in it and so on and whatever. And then I had this minor scholarship to go to Florence for a few months. And I used to, Pradeep was the director of the film, and I used to write him these letters. And the sole purpose of writing those letters that was I wanted a response. Have you ever considered becoming a writer? That was all it was about, and I did get that response. And then I worked on screenplays and wrote 2 feature films. The first, which was about students in architecture school, which won my favorite award of all time. No award will ever match it. Best film in languages other than those specified in Schedule 8 of the Indian Constitution. and then I worked on another film called Electric Moon, and then I suddenly had this desire to work alone. And through all this writing, from the time I was young, I was very conscious of the fact that I lived in this multilingual world, and I was hunting for a writer's language, which does not mean Hindi or Malayalam or Urdu or English. It was a writer's language, a language that I used, not a language that used me. And it was, for me to talk to myself, really, it was a search for sanity, for my own sanity, And I actually there's a passage here where I said, I knew that language animal was out there somewhere, a striped and spotted thing grazing somewhere, waiting for me, the predator, to come and find it, to kill it, and to drink its inky blood, And that was not some vegetarian dream. It was like a proper predatorial, carnivorous dream. And so after I got enough money to sort of, for the first time, because the second film I made was for Channel 4 in England, and so the script money was, in pounds. It translated in a lot of rupees. So I had bought myself some time to be able to, for the first time in my life, sit down and say, what do you want to write? What will you write if you had the chance? And then all these crazy folks came parading in front of me, and they were by then me and Pradeep were living together in this 2-room flat, and our deal was that I could lock one room for 4 hours a day and then come out and pretend I wasn't doing anything. I was just, like, nobody can ask me any questions about what I might have been doing. And after about 4 years, we just went out for a coffee, and I looked at him and said, May in Imanum is a hot, brooding month. The days are long and humid. The river shrinks. And he said, you finished? I said, yeah, I finished. And that was the God of Small Things.
Oh, beautiful. So animals are a theme as well in this book. And nature in general. I mean, the river and the dogs and
In every book
the
and
fleas.
every
Yeah.
essay.
Yeah.
The lice.
But they're also the lice. They're also how you describe people. And I mean, one of the wonderful pleasures of this book is that you get to go bra shopping with John Berger. But there's just this one passage that I have to ask you to read. And it's on page 284, and it has to do with these shopping trips.
284, yeah.
Yeah, 284, she tests. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So this is right
And
towards
we'll
the end
get
of the
to
book.
John the elephant ears after.
My mother, because she was an asthmatic, she would have these great long stints in hospital, sometimes even on a ventilator, and we would never know, whether she would come out or not. And often when your oxygen goes down, the carbon dioxide levels rise in your brain, and then you become a little hallucinatory. And anyway, we would take her to this hospital in Kottayam, this little town, which was actually run by her students, former students. So she had them all wrapped around her finger. I remember once sitting in hospital, she's sitting on a hospital bed, and this doctor called Dr. Rajesh, whose children were in her school actually, walked in, and she had these dimples. So, people with dimples are dangerous. She just looked at him. She is, Dr. Rajesh, do you love me very much? So he had a lisp, and he says, yes, Mrs. Roy, everybody loves you, but he's really embarrassed. And she says, oh, that's nice, because I hate you. And she's like, get me. Anyway, so she would ask, to test, I'll read this, she tested my brothers and my love for her by giving us shopping lists for the most unlikely things, mostly clothes and shoes. When I brought them for her, she would put them all on at once. On one of those occasions, I found myself sitting next to her on a high bed. She was perched on the edge, looking thrilled, swinging her legs like a schoolgirl, wearing her oxygen nasal cannula, her diamond earrings, a size 44 double D lilac lace bra, adult diapers, and a pair of high-top Nike basketball boots for stability, she explained. And I remember thinking, what chance do I have at anything that vaguely resembles normality? She loved herself, everything about herself, and I love that about her. But I especially love that bra because that bra, to get 44 double D is not easy. So I bought it for her in this little town in Italy called Ferrara, where I had gone for a literary festival, and I was speaking together with one of my most beloved writers, John Berger, who wrote Ways of Seeing, and something that I grew up on, and I became friendly with him because one day I didn't know him, and after I'd started writing my political essays, I got a fax from him in his beautiful handwriting saying that your fiction and nonfiction, they walk you around the world like your two legs. And that was so beautiful. So Berger and I went shopping for bras, and I would just hang back and watch him ask in Italian, but in this British accent, excuse me, but do you have 44 double D? And then all these bras would come out. And then I went up.
A couple of beautiful failures,
Yeah.
just shopping.
Yeah. And then I went back to, sorry, Naomi, but I have to tell this story too. So when when my mother's school started, going up from, kindergarten, first class, second, third, fourth, in this little town, co-ed schools, not allowed, the den of iniquity and evil and all that. And then when the girls started wearing bras, the boys, started making fun of them. So my mother sent two of the boys to, she called assembly, then she sent two of the boys to her cupboard to get a bra. And then she said, okay, so this is a bra, this is what it's for. Your sisters and your mothers and your wives will wear it, and if it excites you so much, please keep mine. This sort of changed the pH balance between boys and girls in that school forever. Anyway, so back to Berger.
And why did you call him Jumbo?
So why did I call him Jumbo? I used to call him Jumbo, and he used to call me Utmost, because when I was up in the Alps in his village with him, he made me read, I was writing the Ministry of Utmost Happiness then, and I read him a passage, and then he said, look, you've got to promise me that you're going to go back to India and not get distracted by anything, and you're going to complete this book. And if anything bothers you, just imagine I'm standing behind you like an old elephant, flapping my ears to cool you down. So I said, thanks, Jumbo. And of course, that was the first time I realized how badly I needed an old elephant in my life.
Yeah.
And I went home and broke my promise to him immediately.
Yeah, and wrote Walking with the Comrades, and about the Maoist insurgency. But this is another window into your amazing brain in reading the book, is you talk about how your main character from Ministry of Utmost Happiness, which was not complete yet, traveled with you, like was having their own experiences in the jungle. So we are running out of time. So I'm going to get, I have some of your fantastic questions. I've been trying to weave them in. There's one I think related to your political writing, which has many fans, but also a few foes. This question, how do you keep yourself so composed while speaking when the Indian government and others try to pick apart everything you say? Pick apart and more.
It's not just the Indian government, unfortunately. It's a poison that has seeped into the public imagination. So we are not just fighting our regime now. We are, people like myself are often fighting the majority of the population, whose minds have been completely sodden with this slow drip poison. But how do I keep my composure? Well, Mrs. Roy was a severe asthmatic, and from the time I was 3, I could never respond because I'm going to die and I'm going to go to hospital and it's your fault. So I learned to keep my cool, like a Navy SEAL training on that. So, yeah, absolutely.
There's another question related, I think, to that piece that you wrote, which those of you who haven't read should definitely read that book, Walking with the Comrades. Can you speak to the suppression of tribal and indigenous communities in India by the state and any parallels with countries like Canada? Yeah.
Well, here it's been, at least in this part of Canada,
It's also asking what lessons movements can learn from each other, if you felt like speaking to that.
It's remarkable, but in India, that battle is blood-soaked right now. I mean, Walking with the Comrades was written in 2010, I think. That was the reason I broke my promise to John Berger, because I went back and this note was slipped under my door asking me to go into the forest where the Indian government had basically flooded the forest where all the indigenous tribal people live. They had signed these MOUs to mining companies, and they had flooded the forest with paramilitary, and a vigilante army called the Salva Jurum, and they were burning hundreds of villages, murdering people. It was just the most horrible thing, and the whole media, which is corporate owned by some of these mining companies, was making them out to be the most, and of course the Indian Prime Minister at the time said they are the biggest security threat in India, that is the poorest indigenous communities. So I went in to just report from inside because I just wanted to break this bullying consensus. And I came out and wrote this little book or long essay called Walking with the Comrades. But, you know, people, some of us, I mean, the stories here in this book, some of us campaigned against what this government was calling Operation Green Hunt. Can you just imagine calling it that? And my friends were put into jail, particularly a friend of mine called Professor Sai Baba, who was paralyzed from his waist down, who spoke with me at several public platforms, and he was thrown into jail for 10 years, and then acquitted after 10 years by a judge who said he shouldn't have spent a single day in prison, but he died 6 months later because his body was just broken by a very close friend. And comrades with whom I walked have been slaughtered, like just months ago. One of them, she was, I mean, 99% of them, though they are Maoists, and it's the People's Guerrilla Army, but 99% of them are indigenous people. And she, Comrade Niti, she was called, she walked with me all those weeks, and just a few months ago was shot and then dragged through the forest by her hair till her scalp and hair separated. They are being murdered now. And what can I say?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, the dance between corporate globalization and Hindu nationalism is this ugly waltz, each underwriting the other, and people ought not to see them as separate things.
I think there's a desire to hear a little bit more from you about writing during a time of genocide, and the way that may or may not have made its way into the pages and on tour in this moment.
Well, it's a, you know, I was just thinking, I don't know how familiar you are with this film called Zone of Interest. And I just have this feeling that they're trying to turn us all into characters in the zone of interest. Like, we're supposed to unsee this genocide, or we're supposed to pretend it's not happening, or that our governments are not complicit. India used to be a friend of Palestine, and today, India, you know, in India, there are no protests, very few protests against the genocide. And if there are any, there have been a few, like 100 people might gather, and it's not the police that stopped them. It's the other people, the Hindu nationalists. When, you know, they all have put up Israeli flags as their DPs, and while America and the Western world exports its wealth to Israel in the form of weapons, India exports its poverty in the form of desperate workers who are replacing Palestinians who have been, removed from Israel. So, and India itself as a state is beginning to resemble Israel in so many ways, which is really terrifying. So what we are witnessing under the rubble of Gaza is not just the bodies of the people and the children and the doctors and the journalists of Gaza, but also the carcass of Western liberal democracy and this form of capitalism that underwrites it. And how does this work itself into our pages? Well, in a way, some part of me feels that, I mean, while I was writing this, I was also speaking about Palestine on many fronts and forums, including, when I received the Pinter Prize. You were there too, Naomi. But sometimes I feel that part of the desire to conquer us is also to stop us from doing our work, to stop us from... So for me, I want to be that writer who looks it in the eye and then says, I will still work, you know? But...
Well, we're going to hear a final reading from you. Before, just a very short little section before you do, you asked me to read my favorite passage from the book, which is, it comes in answer to a question. We won't give the whole setup for this question, but you are asked, where are you from? And you sort of stammer and you say, well, and then I'm here now. What's your answer? I'm here now. And then I'll just read the paragraph. The more our world fractures into dagger-shaped shards, the more we club each other to death with our genes, our gods, our flags, our languages, the color of our skin, the purity of our roots, our histories, both true and false. The more my answer to that question remains, I'm here now. It isn't a slogan or a solution to anything, just the personal feelings of an off-grid drifter. But it does come up at other points in the book. And I have seen that you have a T-shirt that says, I'm here now. Yes. So it might not be a slogan, but it's something. And I want to know what we should take from that phrase, or what it really means to you.
Well, I actually do feel a bit like it's the off-grid drifter thing, because you see, in India, we are a society which people think of as anarchic and wild and Bollywood and yoga and all that shit. But actually, it's a very hidebound, cast iron, divided caste hierarchy society, you know, and everyone's name is literally a barcode. And it is and that caste system has forced everybody up and down the line to think hierarchically, vertically, and not in solidarity with other people. And I mean, by chance, there's this Mickey and Mary Roy who broke those, you know, for whatever reason. So I mean, you're just all over I'm just, you know, that. So this first comes up when I met Pradeep, who wanted me to act in his film, and he came to pick me up for a rehearsal or something, and he didn't quite know that I literally lived in a storeroom, you know. So as he's going up the steps, he's like, is your husband here? I'm like, my husband? He's like, yeah, aren't you married? And I was just sort of unsure, because I kind of faked some marriage, and then I wasn't really married, so I couldn't really be divorced, whatever. I said, well, I'm not sure. And he said, so then he's like, what did your father do? I said, my father, I don't know. And then he's like, where are you from? I said, I'm here now. You know, because I was just like, ask me about Eurocommunism or Stalin's Gulag or the sex life of goldfish or something, but don't ask me these ordinary questions, because I don't know. I'm just here now. But
you also say it in the context of, you know, coming back to the what might have been a trauma story of being told that.
Yeah, well, there was this, you know, there was a point where, I mean, quite often my mother used to say in a rage, you know, I wish I had dumped you in an orphanage or whatever. And then there was a time when one of these, you know, Hindu nationalist Bollywood actor, member of parliament trolls, put out a tweet saying, you know, that her birth certificate, my birth certificate, was an apology from God. So I was like, oh, well, he doesn't know that this doesn't even move my needle a little bit, because my mother has told me 100 times about how she tried unsuccessfully to abort me. And then I met a person from my father's family. She was quite old by then, my mother's sister-in-law, Jane. She was English, and she had a bit of dementia, and she thought I was my mother pregnant with me. And she says, I know you don't want that baby, but it's too late. So I was like, by the time I'm through with all this, I'm like, it's too bad, ladies, I'm here now. Like, what can I do?
Oh, I think that's an amazing note to almost end on. You promised us one last reading.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Arundhati.
Thank you.
You have been listening to Books and Ideas Audio, a presentation of the Vancouver Writers Fest. To hear more events like this one and view our upcoming events, visit our website at writersfest.bc.ca.